We bow down to you. We remember you. We call on you. We surrender unto your will. And through your grace, we love you. Oh, Lord Krishna, oh, we have also your
ओम नमो विवस्पते ब्रह्मन् भास्पते विष्णुतेजसे जगत्सवित्रे शुचे सवित्रे कर्मदायिने ओम श्री सूर्याय नमः। ओम ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् एकं नित्यं विमलमचलं सर्वधी साक्षिभूतं भावातीतं त्रिगुणरहितं सद्गुरुं तं नमामि। श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम अखण्डमण्डलाकारं व्याप्तं येन चराचरं तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम ऐं श्री गुरवे नमः। ओम गं गणेशाय नमः। ओम नमः शिवाय नमः। ओम श्री सूर्याय नमः। ओम नमो नारायणाय नमः। ओम श्री लक्ष्मीदेव्यै नमः। ओम ऐं सरस्वत्यै नमः। ओम ह्रीं जय दुर्गायै नमः। नमः आदित्यादिनवग्रहेभ्यो नमः। इंद्रादिदशदिक्पालेभ्यो नमः। वत्सवितारेभ्यो नमः। काव्यादिरश्माभ्यो स्वरूपिण्यै श्री शारदा देव्यै नमः। ॐ ऐं इदं सचन्दनपुष्पं श्रीमत्स्वामी विवेकानन्दाय नमः। ॐ ऐं यतिगन्धपुष्पे श्रीमत्स्वामी ब्रह्मानन्दादि श्रीरामकृष्णपार्षदेभ्यो नमः। ॐ ऐं गेश सचन्दनपुष्पाञ्जलिः साङ्गाय सावरणाय सशक्तिकाय सपार्षदाय सर्वदेवदेवी स्वरूपाय श्रीरामकृष्णाय वौषट। ॐ निरञ्जनं नित्यम् अनन्तरूपं भक्तानुकम्पाधृतविग्रहं वै ईशावतारं परमेशमीड्यं तं रामकृष्णं शिरसा नमामः। एतत् कर्मफलं श्रीरामकृष्णार्पणमस्तु। ॐ विधिहीनं क्रियाहीनं मन्त्रहीनं यदर्चितं मया निवेदितं भक्त्या परिपूर्णं तदस्तु मे। कर्मणा मनसा वाचा त्वत्तो नान्यगतिर्मम अन्तश्चारेण भूतानां द्रष्टा त्वं परमेश्वर। ॐ जननीं शारदां देवीं रामकृष्णं जगद्गुरुं पादपद्मे तयो श्रित्वा प्रणमामि मुहुर्मुहुः। पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर्द्यौ शान्तिर्दिशः शान्तिरवान्तरं दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, the anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. We also know, in addition to this being a new year, it is also a Kalpataru day. We celebrate it as the Kalpataru festival. So we'll begin with a reading of what happened on this day in 1886, and then we will reflect a little bit on it.
This is a reading from the Lila Prasanga, the Sri Ramakrishna's Divine Play by Swami Sardananda, Swami Chaitananda's translation. On the 1st of January, 1886, the Master felt better and expressed a desire to walk in the garden for a short while. Because it was a holiday, the householder devotees began arriving at the Kasipur garden after midday, individually and in groups. The Master came down from upstairs at 3 p.m. There were more than 30 people talking amongst themselves inside the house and sitting under the trees in the garden. They all stood up reverently and bowed down when they saw him. The Master went out through the western door of the hall, descended onto the garden path, and proceeded slowly southward to the gate. The devotees followed him at a little distance. When he reached the midpoint of the path between the house and the gate, the Master saw Girish, Ram, Atul, and a few others under a tree on the west side of the path. They bowed down to him and came to him joyfully. Before anyone had spoken a word, the Master addressed Girish, asking him, "Girish, what have you seen and understood about me that makes you say all these things, that I am an avatar and so on, to everyone, wherever you go?" Unperturbed, Girish knelt down at the Master's feet, folded his hands before his raised face, and responded in a voice choked with emotion. "What more can I say of him? Even the sages, Vyasa and Valmiki, could find no words to measure his glory." Girish's sincere faith expressed in those words so moved the Master that he said to the devotees while looking at Girish, "What more need I tell you? I bless you all. May you all be illumined." He became overwhelmed by love and compassion for his devotees and went into ecstasy after uttering those few words. That selfless and profound blessing touched the devotees deep within their hearts, and they became mad with joy. They forgot time and space. They forgot the Master's illness. They forgot that they had vowed not to touch the Master until his recovery. They saw that a wondrous divine being had come down to them from heaven and was calling to them affectionately. They also felt that their suffering grieved him and that he was carrying in his heart an infinite pain and compassion for them, and offering them shelter as selflessly as a loving mother. They became anxious to bow down to him and take the dust of his feet. Their cries of victory to Ramakrishna resounded in all directions as one by one they bowed down to him. As they touched his feet, the ocean of the Master's compassion burst through all bounds and created an astonishing phenomenon. Almost every day at Dakshineshwar, we had seen the Master become overwhelmed with compassion and grace and bless some devotees with his powerful divine touch. On this day, as he remained in a semi-ecstatic state, he began to touch each devotee present in a similar way, and their joy was boundless. The devotees understood that from this day on, the Master would no longer conceal his divinity from them or from anyone else in the world. They had no doubt that from now on, all sinners and sufferers, despite their shortcomings, lack of spirituality, and feelings of inadequacy, would find shelter at his blessed feet. Seeing the Master in that unique and exalted state, they became speechless and could only watch him as if bewitched. Some called out loudly to everyone inside the house to come and be blessed by the Master's grace. Others picked flowers from the garden and began to worship him, uttering mantras and showering him with flowers. When the Master's ecstasy came to an end after some time, the devotees calmed down. The Master finished his walk in the garden, then returned to the house and sat down in his room.
Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So this day has come to be known, as we saw from the reading, as the Kalpataru Day. The term Kalpataru was really coined by one of the disciples of Ramakrishna. His name was Ramchandra Datta. The Kalpataru, the other word for it is Kalpavriksha, is the mythical tree found in heaven. In Indian mythology, they describe this tree as a tree under you go under the tree and whatever you wish for comes true. And so because Sri Ramakrishna blessed everyone on this day, and everyone's wishes supposedly were fulfilled, a devotee thought that he became a kind of Kalpataru on this day. And so this day became known increasingly as the Kalpataru Day. There are two or three things it's helpful to keep in mind as we reflect on this day. One is how appropriate the name Kalpataru is. The tree as it is described in books, in mythology, is really, as I said, whatever you wish for comes true. And there is often a story told that many of us have heard from childhood, that a person was one day traveling and got tired and rested under a tree, and there wasn't really anything, just a brick under his head as a kind of a cushion to support. And he was so exhausted, and he just thought to himself, it's so hot, I'm so tired. How wonderful it would be if there were a nice bed here. And suddenly a bed appeared. So he didn't know. Well, that tree happened to be this Kalpataru. And so suddenly a bed appeared. And he was, of course, surprised. And then he said, well, then maybe some meal might not be a bad idea. And a nice, delicious meal appeared. So whatever he wished for suddenly seemed to come.
And then a thought came to his mind, oh my God, everything is happening. But what if a tiger were to suddenly come here? And then the story said, well, a tiger came and then the tiger had his own meal there. And so that's how really this Kalpataru is. Whatever you wish for, which is maybe good for you or self-destructive, the Kalpataru will give. Now, in this incident that we just read, Ramakrishna doesn't appear to be that kind of Kalpataru, because when we say he fulfilled the wishes of the devotees who were present, clearly not all the devotees there were wishing only for a vision of the Lord. Like most of us, they had many kinds of desires. But not all of those desires were fulfilled on this day. Only the desires related to that spiritual life were fulfilled. And so clearly, if we must refer to Ramakrishna as Kalpataru, it's kind of a special Kalpataru, which will give only certain wishes which are good for us. So that's one important thing to keep in mind. It's also important to keep in mind, there's one section which wasn't read today. There's one paragraph in this description which says, while everyone was blessed that day, among that crowd, there were 30 or 40 people present, there were two who went and did pranam to Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna said, okay, in good time. He didn't bless them. So again, it's not true that he blessed everybody. And then in the footnote, Swami Tyagananda says, well, eventually, after a few days, they did have some experiences. So eventually they got the blessing, but not on that day. And so there is something to be reflected about, is that if we are not ready to receive the grace, then even if the grace is available, we may not be able to make the best use of it. And so while it's common for devotees to seek God's grace, it might be perhaps more practical to seek the ability to hold that grace. Because if we don't have the capacity and the ability to hold it, then even if the grace comes, we either may not recognize it, or if we recognize it, we may not be able to hold it. So that's a second thing to be kept in mind about this. A third question that can come is, well, this is a historical incident that happened in 1886. So that's like 134 years. Is that a good? Okay. Oh, not bad in math, it looks like. So about 134 years ago. And so we might ask today, sitting here in 2020, get used to now calling it 2020. What would this incident, besides information and besides a little bit of sense of upliftment, what could this incident mean to us 134 years later? Are we eligible in some way to receive that grace? And would that grace come only on the 1st of January? And as this reading pointed out, that this is something that didn't happen only on one day, that those who were with Ramakrishna, who spent longer time with him, found that such acts of grace appeared on a fairly regular basis. And yet, it was on this one day that it became more visible, more public, so to speak. And that was why Swami Tyagananda, the author of this book from which we did the reading, prefers to call this event or this episode not as Ramakrishna becoming a Kalpataru, but he said, in this day was a day of self-revelation of the Master, and giving the people who came what he calls an Abhaya Pradhan, the act of freedom from fear. Now fear, as we have seen on many earlier occasions, occurs at many different levels. Clearly, some people are afraid of snakes and afraid of cold or heat or whatever. But there are subtler forms of fear, often unexpressed, often very latent, but never totally absent. Oftentimes, the Sanskrit word for this is called abhinivesha. in yoga books as well. And that is, it's the unconscious, unexpressed fear of non-being. And of course, then, in the physical sense, that just death. So one of the reasons death is such an unpleasant topic and we don't want to think about it or talk about it is because there is this fear involved, because it's mystery. Intellectually, we all understand we are going to die one day, but since none of us knows what does it really entail, besides having faith and believing in the books that say, well, this is what happens. But all that we see is suddenly a person who is living, moving, talking becomes totally non-functional. The body is gone and you just cremate it or bury it afterwards. And so there is this fear related to death in our. Similarly, there is a fear that in certain sense the ego feels. Again, it's very subtle. The fear related to being judged by other people, what other people think of me, or how I come across to other people, whether people think of me highly or lowly, and so on. So there are all these different fears. And when we have faith in a higher reality, either personal or impersonal, many of these fears become irrelevant. They may not totally disappear, but they become a little irrelevant because we have this strong support from a very real presence who we may not have experienced directly, but there is this deep faith that I am being protected. And so this particular event, the episode on 1st of January in 1886, was that kind of a revelation to the 30 or 40 people present there that, yes, we are not just helpless, vulnerable creatures going through this mystery of life, not knowing what is to come, but then there is someone to help us, to support us. And that sense of faith and a surrender to a higher, deeper goal is possible even today, 134 years later. So if we can receive that grace, if we put ourselves subtly in the presence of Ramakrishna. We cannot go back in time unless what is that? In Harry Potter, the last section they had, you could go back in time. Time Turner or something? Any Harry Potter fans here? So, yes, I mean, in fictional books, you can kind of go back in time. But spiritually, we can go back, we can go forward, because spirit transcends the sense of time. So, whenever we celebrate the birthdays of this grace one, we just celebrated Christmas, we'll be celebrating the birthdays of Swamiji, Holy Mother we just finished, and Sri Ramakrishna. The birthday celebrations also are really, can we participate in the birth of these great prophets and incarnation? And we can, in a very subtle way. When we see, kind of have them born within our heart, then the birthday celebration becomes real. So similarly, Ramakrishna can become real to us when that presence is felt deep down inside our heart. And only in that way, we become eligible to receive that grace. Not simply looking upon this as a historical event, but an event that is continually occurring, and we can access it only if it becomes real in the depths of our being. One other small point, and it is this. This happened in January of 1886, and Sri Ramakrishna passed away in August of that year. So, a little over 8 months. There is no record, and we don't know whether the word Kalpataru was ever used in his presence or whether it happened afterwards. We don't know. Probably it didn't happen during his lifetime. But what did happen during his lifetime was, of course, they proclaimed him as an avatar, as an incarnation. And Ramakrishna himself had a lot of fun with people calling him an incarnation. The first two among them to proclaim that he was an incarnation, one was Girish Ghosh, who was a dramatist in Calcutta, and the second was this same person who called him the Kalpataru in name of Ramchandra Datta. And Sri Ramakrishna would sometimes say, oh, these are the two people. One is a dramatist and one is a chemist calling me Ramatar. Who's going to believe these people? So he made fun of the whole idea. And yet we know, of course, that increasingly a large number of people in the world today, some see him as a great saint, some see him as a great mystic, some even see him as an avatar. So there's one thing that is worth reflecting upon, and that is the connection or the distinction as well between attainment and recognition. One of the things that distinguishes a spiritual person from a worldly or a non-spiritual person would be that how strongly are attainment and recognition connected. Oftentimes in life we see that we might achieve something either through some work that we do or some art that we might, some creative product of our art, it's music or writing or whatever that we might produce, or something that we, a good thing that we do. And if nobody recognizes it, nobody even notices it, do we feel like, oh, we're just like useless? What's the point? Nobody even saw it. Nobody even noticed it. Or are we just content in just the joy of attaining whatever it is that we attain in whatever field? The spiritual quality would be that the attainment itself becomes the value, irrespective of whether or not it is recognized. And because Ramakrishna was fully content and stable in whatever it is that he had attained, it was totally immaterial, irrelevant to him whether people considered him a saint or a mystic or an incarnation. It sat lightly upon him. And I think one of the ways we can test how much spiritually mature we have become is to ask our own self in a kind of a self-examination that we can do. How much does recognition mean to me in life? To be recognized by my peers, by my family, by my friends. How much does it mean? And if I don't get what I see as a recognition or appreciation or praise that I deserve, how am I affected at all? And as I said, a sign of spirituality would be that just the joy of attaining whatever a goal that we set before ourselves should be enough. And recognition, if it comes, that's fine. If it doesn't come, even better in some ways. So this is also a thought that has been on my mind since the last few days, and especially in regard to Kalpataru, because to refer to someone, oh, you are a Kalpataru, you are an incarnation. I mean, even if someone, just think about it this way, if someone were to just say, oh, you are a genius, you're wonderful, and we just feel, this is so nice. We can't imagine what it would be someone said, oh, you are an incarnation. And so either we get puffed up by all the praise or we just feel ashamed by it, embarrassed by it if we don't feel we deserve it. But can we remain unaffected by it? Swami Vivekananda once said that when he returned from his 4 years in the West after the Parliament of Religions, and he got such a rousing welcome in India, throughout, from the length and breadth of India, wherever he went, is like really what we understand today by the term celebrity. There were people, they took him in a chariot. the kings, the kings of the local, the kingdoms, this was a this was during the British rule, and there were small kingdoms everywhere. See, the kings unharnessed the horses and pulled the chariot. The kings were pulling the chariot in which Vivekananda sat. And Swami Vivekananda said, if anyone would have gotten even a 1,000th part of the respect and adulation and admiration that people have given me, that person won't be able to keep his head on his shoulders. So we have to really take this to our heart and find out how much does what people say about us or think about us matter to us so much. And I think that's one of the things that would be helpful to consider as we begin this new year, that we need to find ways of measuring that if we look upon ourselves as spiritual seekers, how can I know that I am developing spiritually, that I am growing in my spirituality? We need to have some markers within us. And one of the ways we could consider is how important is attaining something as opposed to being recognized for it or being given a credit for achieving something. So that's what we will try to do going forward. This is the beginning of a year, and this month, as you know, this will be the last time we meet in the month of January. Then we have a winter recess, and then we will meet on the 2nd of February. The first Sunday in February, we'll have Swami Vivekananda's puja that time. So this holiday from the services that we have, we could use it as a opportunity to spend a little more time than we usually do in deep reflection and assessing our spiritual progress. I think that kind of a periodic assessment is very important. Otherwise, our life can just, we are like a log of wood adrift in a stream, this kind of an unconscious stream of life. And if we don't periodically assess which direction we are going, then we may never know where we might find ourselves. And so a periodic assessment is very helpful. And so these recesses that we have, the summer recess in August and the winter recess in January, are opportunities that, that those of you who have been coming for Sunday satsangs every week. So what do we do now? These now next 4 Sundays, there is no satsang. Well, we can have our own personal satsang with our own self, and try to spend time in reflection. There was the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh. I'm a great admirer of many of his writings and thoughts. So he once said that if you have an appointment or someone wants to come and wants to meet with you or talk with you or wants you to go out for a walk or a movie or something, and if it's the time you normally spend in reflection or prayer or meditation, then sometimes many of us who like to keep our spiritual practice personal and private and wouldn't want to flaunt it before your friends, especially those who may not appreciate or may not be in tune with your own ideals, we don't try to speak about it. So if someone invites you and then you can't, well, it's time for my prayer, I can't come. And many of us avoid saying things like that. And so in one of his talks, Thich Nhat Hanh suggested it would not be a falsehood to say, if someone wants you to, and it's your prayer time or meditation time, to say, I'm sorry, I can't come, I already have an appointment. Because a prayer or a meditation is an appointment with yourself. That's the time we really get to know ourselves. And so if you don't want to tell people now, it's my meditation time, I can't come, you can say, I have an appointment. Only if they come to know what that appointment means, the next time, even if you have a real appointment, they will think, oh, this person wants to meditate, which is okay. Anyway, so this was just, so I mentioned this only so that we need to make this periodic appointment with our own selves. We meet with people throughout the day, but we need to find, even if it's a few minutes every day, to just meet with ourselves. The tragedy of modern living is that we know a lot about other people, other things, but so little about our own selves. And we want, just like when we want to know some person, we try to spend time with that person. Only then we get to know that person. Now, if I want to know myself, I need to spend time with myself. And that's what self-reflection means. That's what prayer means. That's what meditation means. And if we are able to do that, it's then that this grace that we are reflecting on today, the grace of God that can come, that will become apparent to us. It's not as if the grace comes and goes. The grace is always present. But when we make that appointment with ourselves, we attain that clarity of mind, that sensitivity, then we recognize the grace that is always present within us, without us, all the time. It's always there. All that we need is that the tuning in to the right frequency to be able to accept that grace. So on this day, my earnest prayer to Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji, that through their infinite grace, may we be able to find the truth within our own hearts and go beyond this existential worries and sufferings of human life. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Saying this is a day of new beginnings on the inside back page of the book.
This is a day of
this is a day of new beginnings. So whatever we wanted, we had planned to do last year, but for one reason or other we couldn't do. This is a day we could then say, whatever I wanted to accomplish, whatever I plan to do, whichever way I plan to improve, make improvements in my life, I can then now make a beginning and not give up on some of our unfinished plans of the past. And the new beginning the next new beginning doesn't have to come on the 1st of January of 2021. In some sense, we could say that every day can be a day of new beginning. My teacher would a lot of times I've heard him say that at the end of the day, before we go to sleep, to reflect very briefly, kind of have all the things that happened that day, especially the major things that happened that day, mentally go through it in a fast forward mode, not spending too much time over it, less, maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes, but just reflect on whatever happened that day, which are the things we did correctly, which are the things we didn't do correctly, a kind of a daily self-assessment. And once we recognize that some of the things we dealt with in a good way, that can increase our confidence, and some of the things we feel we could have done better, we say, well, if something similar were to occur tomorrow, I will not make the mistakes that I did today. And then offer everything at the feet of the divine, go to sleep. And then next morning, as we begin the day, before beginning the day, again seek the guidance and as help of God as we do our morning prayer, that may I be a better person, a new person. So every day in some sense can be a day of new beginning. That's the way the self-renewal, the process of self-renewing is a constant process. The word that often gets used to refer to the Atman in the Upanishads, Puranam, that's the word that is often used. In Sanskrit, Puranam can be translated as ancient. And Shankaracharya, in his commentary on that word Puranam, he says, Pura api nava iva. That means the Atman, the spirit, it's never had a beginning. It never has an end. So it's really, nothing can be more ancient than it because it's beginningless. And yet, Pura api, in spite of being so ancient, nava iva. It's fresh. It's new every day. Because when things become old and ancient, they are old. But the spirit is such, it's ancient and yet it is fresh. So sometimes as we grow older, sometimes people can feel like, oh, now I'm over the hill, I'm now gone, I'm old, I'm not young anymore. But if we recognize what Puranam means, that it's possible, if we practice this every day being a day of new beginning, then we can be young and fresh. The body can go its own way. But deep down, the spirit, if the more we identify with that deepest core of our own existence, we can be fresh and new every day. And the new we remain, the easier it becomes to learn from life. Otherwise, once we kind of develop an attitude of, oh, been there, done that, and just be cynical about everything, feel like, oh, I have nothing to learn, then we stop growing. In order to then feel that a sense of an inner youthfulness, that desire to learn, that can come through refreshing ourselves every day. And so a day of new beginnings, this is a beautiful song. And something that if you memorize it or if you know it, you can just hum it to yourself. It's very uplifting that I can constantly be renewing myself. In that sense, none of us can ever get old anytime. So as we come towards the end of today's program, let's try to renew ourselves and keep renewing ourselves throughout this year. So when we meet next January for the next Kalpataru day, all of us will be 1 year younger rather than 1 year older. So let's try to do that. So let's do the prayer on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
We will sing Sarva Mangala on page 5.